Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt like you didn't belong? Like every eye was judging you, every whisper was about you? That's exactly how I felt on that cold November morning in Manhattan when I rushed into my grandfather's lawyer's office 20 minutes late, wearing my work uniform that still smelled like coffee and bacon grease. But what happened in that room changed everything I thought I knew about my family, about myself, and about the grandfather I barely got to know. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories about family drama, unexpected twists, and life lessons, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Now let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Emma Collins, and I'm 26 years old. I've been working double shifts at a diner in Queens for the past 3 years, trying to make ends meet while taking night classes at community college. My apartment is a studio barely big enough for my bed and a hot plate, and my car is a 2003 Honda Civic that sounds like it's dying every time I turn the key. I'm not complaining, though. I've learned to appreciate what I have because I've never had much. My grandfather, William Hartford, was a different story entirely. He was a real estate mogul who owned half of Manhattan's most valuable properties. The Hartford name meant something in New York. It opened doors, commanded respect, and came with a fortune most people only dream about. But to me, he was just a stranger who happened to share my blood. You see, my mother was the black sheep of the Hartford family. She fell in love with my father, a mechanic from Brooklyn, and when she got pregnant with me at 19, her family cut her off completely. They said she'd thrown away her future, that she'd embarrassed them. My grandfather gave her an ultimatum: leave my father and come home, or never speak to the family again. My mother chose love. She chose us. Growing up, I heard stories about the Hartford mansion in the Upper East Side, about lavish parties and expensive cars, about cousins who went to private schools and summered in the Hamptons. But those stories felt like fairy tales, distant and unreal. My reality was helping my mom pay bills, wearing hand-me-downs, and working part-time jobs since I was 15. My father died when I was 12, a car accident on a rainy night. After that, it was just me and my mom against the world. She worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, and I watched her sacrifice everything for me. The Hartford family never reached out. Not once, not even when my mom got sick. Breast cancer, stage 4. By the time they caught it, it had spread everywhere. I was 23, and watching the only person who'd ever really loved me fade away in a hospital bed. I called my grandfather then, desperate, hoping maybe he'd help with the medical bills, maybe even come see his daughter one last time. The call went straight to voicemail. I left 3 messages. He never called back. My mom died 6 months later. I held her hand as she took her last breath, and in that moment, I promised myself I'd never need anyone from that family. I'd make it on my own, just like she did. 3 years passed. I buried myself in work and school, trying to build something resembling a future. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from a lawyer's office, Morton, Schwartz, and Associates. They informed me that William Hartford had passed away 2 weeks ago and that I was requested to attend the reading of his will. I almost hung up, almost, but curiosity got the better of me. That's how I found myself on the A train that November morning, wearing my diner uniform because I'd been working the breakfast shift and couldn't afford to miss the hours. The train was delayed, of course, track maintenance. By the time I made it to the Midtown office building, I was already 15 minutes late and sweating despite the cold. The office was everything I expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, mahogany furniture that probably cost more than my annual salary, and a receptionist who looked at me like I'd tracked mud across her Persian rug. She directed me to conference room B with barely concealed disdain, and I could feel her eyes on my back as I walked away. I took a deep breath before opening the door, trying to prepare myself for whatever was waiting inside. Nothing could have prepared me for the wave of hostility that hit me the moment I stepped through. The room was full of people dressed in black designer suits and dresses, all seated around a massive conference table. I recognized some faces from old photographs my mother had kept hidden in a shoebox. Uncle Richard, my grandfather's eldest son, sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression cold and calculating. Next to him was Aunt Patricia, dripping in pearls and judgment. There were cousins I'd never met, their spouses, even some people who looked like business associates. And then there was the laughter. It started low, a few chuckles that rippled through the room as I stood in the doorway. Uncle Richard's booming voice cut through the murmurs. "Well, well, well. Look who decided to grace us with her presence. I see you came straight from work. How appropriate." His tone dripped with sarcasm, and the room erupted in laughter. Aunt Patricia fanned herself dramatically. "Oh, Richard, be nice. She probably couldn't afford to take the day off. Isn't that right, dear? She looked at me with mock sympathy that made my skin crawl. One of my cousins, a guy about my age in an expensive suit, whispered loudly to the person next to him. I can smell the grease from here. Did she even shower? My face burned with humiliation, but I forced myself to walk to the only empty chair at the far end of the table. Every step felt like a mile. I could feel their eyes on me, judging my scuffed sneakers, my polyester uniform, my pulled-back hair that desperately needed a trim. We were just discussing how much longer we should wait, Uncle Richard said, looking at his Rolex pointedly. Some of us have important meetings to get to. We're not all lucky enough to have flexible schedules at— He paused, squinting at my name tag. Mel's Diner. More laughter. I sat down and stared at my hands, willing myself not to cry, not to give them the satisfaction. The lawyer, Mr. Morton, cleared his throat. He was an older gentleman with kind eyes that seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the atmosphere in the room. Now that everyone is here, we can begin. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. Let's make this quick, Uncle Richard said, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place, which I suppose he assumed he soon would. I've got a tea time at 2. Mr. Morton opened a thick folder and began with the formalities. He explained that William Hartford's estate was valued at approximately $800 million, including real estate holdings, investments, and various business interests. The room practically hummed with greed. I could see people doing mental calculations, already spending money that wasn't yet theirs. Mr. Hartford was very specific about his wishes, Mr. Morton continued, adjusting his glasses. He spent considerable time updating his will in the months before his passing. Yes, we know Father was thorough, Aunt Patricia said impatiently, her fingers already reaching for her phone. Let's get to the distributions, shall we? Mr. Morton nodded and began reading. To my son, Richard Hartford, I leave my collection of vintage wines and the sum of $50,000. The room went silent. Uncle Richard's face turned an alarming shade of red. 50,000. There must be some mistake. The wine collection isn't even worth. To my daughter, Patricia Hartford Stone, Mr. Morton continued, I leave my late wife's jewelry collection and the sum of $50,000. Aunt Patricia's mouth fell open. That's impossible. My father promised me the Park Avenue penthouse. This is outrageous, the lawyer continued, unmoved by the outbursts. He went through the list methodically. Each cousin received $50,000 in some personal item, a watch, a painting, a set of golf clubs. The business associates received generous bonuses and severance packages. By the time he was halfway through, the room was in chaos. People were shouting, demanding explanations, threatening lawsuits. Uncle Richard stood up, slamming his hands on the table. This is absurd. That's barely 10 million distributed, and Father was worth nearly $1 billion. Where is everything else going? Some charity? I'll contest this. I'll have this whole thing thrown out. Mr. Morton waited for the noise to die down. Then he looked directly at me. For the first time since I'd entered the room, I felt something other than contempt from someone at that table. If I may continue, he said firmly. There is one final beneficiary. The room fell silent again. Uncle Richard looked around, his face twisted with confusion and rage. Who? Some mistress we don't know about? Another illegitimate grandchild? Mr. Morton's voice was steady and clear. To my granddaughter, Emma Rose Collins. I felt my heart stop. Every eye in the room turned to me. The world seemed to move in slow motion. I leave the entirety of my remaining estate. This includes all real estate properties, investment portfolios, business holdings, and liquid assets, valued at approximately $750 million. Additionally, I leave her the Hartford family home, all its contents, and full controlling interest in Hartford Enterprises. The silence was deafening. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think, couldn't process what I'd just heard. Then all hell broke loose. Uncle Richard lunged across the table, his face purple with rage. This is a fraud. She manipulated him. She probably didn't even know him. That's exactly the point, Aunt Patricia shrieked. She's a nobody, a diner waitress. This is identity theft or coercion or something illegal. My cousin stood up, pointing at me accusingly. She probably forged this. Daddy paid for a fake will. Mr. Morton raised his hand for silence. But the shouting continued. Security guards appeared at the door, clearly prepared for this reaction. The lawyer's voice cut through the chaos, amplified somehow. The will is legitimate and has been verified by 3 independent law firms. Mr. Hartford was of sound mind when he made these changes. He also left a letter from Ms. Collins to be read privately. He turned to me, his expression sympathetic. Ms. Collins, if you'll come with me, please. I stood on shaking legs. The room spun around me. As I walked toward the door, Aunt Patricia grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. You think you've won something? she hissed. "You have no idea what you've just walked into. We will destroy you. We will take everything." A security guard gently removed her hand, and I followed Mr. Morton out of the room and into his private office. My legs barely carried me. Behind us, I could still hear the shouting, the threats, the disbelief. Mr. Morton closed the door and gestured to a comfortable leather chair. He poured me a glass of water from a crystal pitcher, and I drank it without tasting it. My hands were shaking so badly that water splashed onto my uniform. "I know this is overwhelming," he said gently, sitting across from me. "Take your time. I don't understand," I whispered. We never, why would he do this?" Mr. Morton pulled out an envelope from the folder. It was thick, expensive paper, and my name was written on it in shaky handwriting, my grandfather's handwriting. "He came to see me 9 months ago," Mr. Morton explained. "He said he'd made terrible mistakes in his life, but the worst was how he treated your mother. He'd been trying to find you for years, but your mother had changed her name, moved several times. He finally located you about a year ago." My throat tightened. "He knew where I was for a year and never contacted me?" "He wanted to," Mr. Morton said, "but he was dying, pancreatic cancer. He didn't want your first conversation with him to be about his death or his money. He hired a private investigator to watch over you, to make sure you were okay. He knew about your mother's death. He knew about your struggles, and he was devastated that he hadn't been there. Tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. He let her die alone. He let us both struggle for years when he could have helped with a phone call." "I know." Mr. Morton's voice was filled with genuine sadness. "He knew that too. That's why he wrote this letter. Please read it. It explains everything." With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and pulled out several pages of handwritten text. My grandfather's final words to me. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just learned that I've left you everything. I imagine you're confused, angry, and overwhelmed. You have every right to be all of those things and more. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I need you to understand why I did what I did, both then and now. When your mother told me she was pregnant with you, I was furious. Not because she was pregnant, but because I saw my carefully constructed world falling apart. I'd built an empire, created a legacy, and I thought I knew exactly how the story was supposed to go. Your mother was supposed to marry someone from our world, someone who would expand the Hartford influence. Instead, she fell in love with a good man who worked with his hands, who made her laugh, who treated her like she was precious. I gave her that ultimatum because I was a coward. I thought she'd choose the money, the comfort, the life I could provide. When she chose your father instead, I was shocked. And then I was too proud to admit I'd been wrong. For 26 years, I told myself I'd made the right choice. I built my business bigger. I accumulated more wealth. I threw myself into work so I wouldn't have to think about the daughter I'd lost, or the granddaughter I'd never met. My other children and grandchildren were always there, always asking for money, always waiting for me to die so they could fight over the scraps. Not one of them ever asked me how I was doing. Not one of them ever visited just to visit. Then, a year ago, I had a scare. Collapsed in my office. Thought it was a heart attack. Turned out to be a panic attack. Lying there on that floor, I realized I was going to die alone, surrounded by people who only loved my money. That's when I decided to find you. What I discovered broke my heart all over again. I learned about your father's death, about your mother's cancer, about how you called me, begged me for help, and I was too stubborn to even listen to the messages. Emma, I listened to those voicemails after I found you. I heard the desperation in your voice, the love you had for your mother, the hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd be decent enough to help. And I wasn't. I will carry that guilt to my grave and beyond. I watched you from a distance for months. I saw you work yourself to exhaustion, saw you study late into the night, saw you help neighbors even when you could barely help yourself. You have your mother's heart, her strength, her kindness. You are everything she was and more. You are everything my other grandchildren should have been but aren't. By the time I worked up the courage to reach out to you, the doctors told me I had less than 6 months to live. The cancer was everywhere. I could have introduced myself then, could have spent those last months getting to know you, but I was selfish one last time. I didn't want you to know me as the dying old man full of regrets. I didn't want your memories of your grandfather to be hospital rooms and morphine drips. Instead, I did the only thing I could. I changed my will. Emma, you're about to inherit more money than you can possibly imagine. My lawyers will help you manage it. But more than the money, I'm giving you a choice that your mother never had. You can keep the Hartford name and everything that comes with it, or you can walk away. You can sell it all, donate it all, burn it all for all I care. It's yours to do with as you wish. But if I may offer one piece of advice from a foolish old man, use it to be happy. Your mother chose love over money, and even though it meant struggle, She lived a life full of meaning. She raised an incredible daughter. She loved and was loved. In the end, she was wealthier than I ever was. My other children and grandchildren will fight you. They'll say terrible things. They'll try to prove you're unworthy or that you manipulated me. Let them talk. You know the truth, and so will anyone who matters. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I have one final request. Don't let bitterness poison the rest of your life the way it poisoned mine. Don't let my mistakes define you. Use this opportunity to live the life your mother would have wanted for you. Be generous. Be kind, be happy, and know that in my final months, thinking about you, learning about you, was the only time I felt like I'd done something right. You gave me hope that the Hartford name could mean something good again. I'm sorry I never got to know you, Emma. I'm sorry I failed you and your mother so completely. But I'm grateful that you exist, grateful that your mother's love and sacrifice created someone so extraordinary. Build something beautiful with this opportunity. That's all I ask. With love and regret, your grandfather, William Hartford. By the time I finished reading, I was sobbing. Mr. Morton handed me a box of tissues and gave me privacy to collect myself. I sat in that office for what felt like hours, reading and rereading the letter, trying to reconcile the grandfather I'd imagined, cold, cruel, heartless, with the broken, regretful man on these pages. When I finally emerged, Mr. Morton walked me through the basics. There were accounts to set up, documents to sign, security measures to implement. My life as I knew it was over. Everything was about to change. What do I do now? I asked, feeling lost. Mr. Morton smiled. Whatever you want, Ms. Collins. That's the beauty and the burden of it. But if I may suggest, go home. Process this. Don't make any major decisions for at least a month. Let the shock wear off. And I'd recommend hiring personal security. Your relatives are volatile. He drove me home himself, in a town car that felt absurdly out of place on my street in Queens. Neighbors stared as I got out. I climbed the 4 flights to my studio apartment, sat on my bed, and tried to understand that my life had just completely transformed. The next few days were a blur. News of the will spread quickly. The media picked up the story. Billionaire's secret granddaughter inherits fortune. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters camped outside my building. Relatives I'd never met suddenly wanted to reconnect. Uncle Richard filed a lawsuit contesting the will. Aunt Patricia gave interviews claiming I'd seduced her elderly father. My cousins started a social media campaign to paint me as a gold digger. But through it all, I kept thinking about my grandfather's letter, about my mother's choice, about what really mattered. I hired the best lawyers money could buy, and they made the lawsuit go away quickly. The will was airtight, but I didn't stop there. I went through every Hartford business holding, every investment, every property. I discovered that my grandfather had made his fortune through real estate, yes, but some of those properties were in low-income neighborhoods where he'd displaced families, where he'd raised rents to unaffordable levels, where he'd chosen profit over people. That's when I knew what I had to do. I established the Elizabeth Collins Foundation, named after my mother. The foundation's mission: to provide affordable housing, healthcare assistance, and educational opportunities to working families. I transferred half of my inheritance into it immediately, $375 million. I sold several of the Hartford properties, but not to other developers. I sold them to nonprofits, to community organizations, to people who would use them to help rather than exploit. I kept some properties and converted them into affordable housing units. I paid off medical debt for thousands of families in the same hospital where my mother died. I established scholarship funds for students at community colleges across New York. I created a grant program for single mothers trying to go back to school. And I went back to work at Mel's Diner, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The regulars there had been kind to me when I had nothing. They deserved my loyalty more than any blood relative ever had. The Hartford family was furious. They said I was squandering the fortune, that I was spitting on my grandfather's legacy. But they were wrong. I was honoring it. I was doing what he should have done decades ago. I was choosing people over profit, love over legacy. Uncle Richard tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. It didn't work. Aunt Patricia wrote a tell-all book about the greedy waitress who stole the Hartford fortune. It bombed. My cousins eventually stopped calling when they realized I wasn't going to fund their lifestyles. The media narrative changed too. At first, I was the Cinderella story, the poor girl who got rich. Then I was the foolish girl giving it all away. But eventually, people started to understand. Letters poured in from families I'd helped, from students who got to go to college, from sick people who didn't have to choose between medicine and rent. I moved into the Hartford mansion, but I didn't live there alone. I converted most of it into a community center. The ballroom became a space for free after-school programs. The library became a resource center for job seekers. The guest rooms became temporary housing for families in transition. I kept a small apartment on the third floor for myself, and that was more than enough. On the first anniversary of my grandfather's death, I visited his grave for the first time. It was a cold November day, exactly like the day I'd walked into that lawyer's office. I stood there in my diner uniform, having just finished a shift, and I talked to him. "I hope you can see what I'm doing," I said to the headstone. "I hope you understand. I'm not trying to destroy what you built. I'm trying to transform it into something Mom would be proud of, something you should have been proud of." The wind picked up, rustling through the bare trees. I like to think he heard me. I like to think, somehow, he approved. Now, 2 years later, I'm still working at Mel's Diner 3 days a week. I'm still living in my apartment at the community center. I still drive that beat-up Honda Civic, though I could buy 100 sports cars if I wanted. But I've also put 10,000 kids through college. I've helped 5,000 families avoid homicide. I've funded 3 new community health centers. I've created jobs, opportunities, and hope for people who needed it most. The Hartford relatives have mostly faded into the background. A few tried to reconcile, claiming they'd always loved me and never meant any harm. I'm polite, but distant. I learned the hard way that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when things are hard, who loves you when you have nothing to offer but yourself. People often ask me if I regret giving so much away. They can't understand why someone would voluntarily choose a simpler life when they could have everything. But here's what they don't understand. I do have everything. I have purpose. I have peace. I have the knowledge that I'm making a real difference in the world. My mother taught me that love is worth more than money. My grandfather taught me, too late, that regret is the heaviest burden you can carry. And somewhere between those 2 lessons, I learned who I want to be. I'm Emma Collins. I'm a waitress. I'm a philanthropist. I'm a woman who walked into a room full of people who wanted to make her feel small and walked out with the power to change lives. And every single day, I choose to use that power to lift others up, the way I wish someone had lifted up my mother. That's the real inheritance my grandfather left me. Not the money, not the properties, not the Hartford name. He left me a choice, and I chose to be better than the bitterness, better than the greed, better than the legacy of exclusion and judgment. And you know what? I sleep better than I ever have. In my small apartment, in my thrift store pajamas, knowing that somewhere tonight, a family has a roof over their heads because of a choice I made. A student is studying for a better future because of a scholarship I funded. A sick person is getting treatment because of a bill I paid. That's worth more than all the mansions and designer clothes and fancy cars in the world. My relatives laughed when I walked into that room late, wearing my uniform, looking like I didn't belong. They were right. I didn't belong there. I belonged somewhere better, somewhere real, somewhere that mattered. And now every day, I wake up in that place and I get to choose again. Who will I help today? What difference will I make? How will I honor my mother's love and my grandfather's regret by being someone they both could be proud of? That's my story. That's how a girl from Queens who served coffee for a living ended up with a fortune she never wanted, and used it to become the person she always was inside. That's how laughter in a conference room turned into purpose, how contempt turned into compassion, how an ending became a beginning. And if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's this. The people who laugh at you, who judge you, who try to make you feel less than, they're usually the ones who are afraid you'll realize you're more than they ever could be. Don't let them define you. Don't let their limitations become yours. Walk into every room like you belong there, not because of what you own or what you wear, but because you know who you are and what you stand for. And if they laugh, let them. You'll have the last laugh when you build something beautiful from their scorn. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that there's always another way, that money isn't everything, and that the best revenge against people who underestimate you is simply to become the best version of yourself. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a shift at the diner in 20 minutes, and Mel hates when I'm late.